We are we're just about halfway, just past the halfway point in our sermon series, A Church Called Tove. We are working through the themes found in the book by Scott McKnight and his daughter, Laura Barringer. We're working through this book because we're simultaneously working to improve our church's policies and procedures around abuse prevention and reporting. We feel like this is really important for several reasons. One of the main reasons is that it's obvious the church, with the big capital C, needs help with this. It doesn't really matter what communion, what denomination, what affiliation, what style of worship, how big, how small. It's been in the news a lot that churches are struggling to come to grips and face truthfully the reality that abuse takes place within the life of the church. We want to be proactive about this. And so instead of waiting until it's too late and then trying to figure out how to respond about it, we are making efforts now to ensure that we have a church that has a culture of care and safety. We want everyone in this church to take seriously the call of Jesus to love your neighbor as yourself. And it feels like it should be obvious, it feels like it should be clear that loving your neighbor as you love yourself means that you don't abuse your neighbor. But oftentimes the church, as it institutionalizes, becomes convinced that the institution and its continued success, or the leaders of the institution and their continued position, is more important than the life and the health of the people who make up the church. So as we work with grace, godly response to abuse in the Christian environment, behind the scenes, to develop policies that provide care and safety for all people and that are actionable, right? Anything that you have on a piece of paper is just on a piece of paper until it gets lived. Out here in our public conversation as a church, we want to make sure that what we're doing is not just having a document or a book that's linked on our website or that we hand out to volunteers saying, here are the rules that you must follow. We want our whole church, every member, to be bought into the idea that kids deserve, I think most people in most places believe that kids deserve to be protected, right? But we also believe that one another, like the one another of the church, deserves to be protected, that people shouldn't be belittled, they shouldn't be demeaned, they shouldn't be intimidated, that their bodies should be treated with integrity, that they shouldn't be approached in ways that are inappropriate, that we should be clear and honest and transparent about our finances, and that people's faith should not be weaponized against them. So we're working on multiple fronts to make sure, or at least it's tough, right? You can lead a horse to water. But we want to ensure that we're doing absolutely everything we can, everything that's within our power, to make sure that abuse does not take place in the life of our church. And if it does, that we're ready to respond appropriately, quickly, and compassionately towards those who are harmed. Now, I'm not just doing book reviews, right? Chapter reviews through the book. We're taking the themes of the chapters, incorporating some of the insights, but we're keeping our eyes on Jesus. That's how we're moving through this sermon series, because what you see in Jesus, right, is always care, is always love. Now, that doesn't mean that that love doesn't have uncomfortable conversations. Love is not exempt from confrontation. But love ensures the health, the life, the safety of the other. And so if we are able to keep our eyes on Jesus, and even as Jesus says, abide in his word, then without spiritually bypassing real concerns, we believe that we'll be able to live into the culture of care and safety that we really desire for our church. And this week, in our gospel text, Jesus says, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Truth is our theme for this week, our topic. And I want to give you two examples from my own life that illustrate this point. And I feel like this point has to be carried through all the way through the sermon today. Without this point, everything I say is not really going to make a lot of sense or maybe even matter. But the truth is never abstract. Are you with me? The truth is never abstract. And I say that, and I mean that in this sense. When we seek to live the truth as it is in Jesus, it's not about answers that don't connect to your everyday life. Let me give you two examples. First, I'm doing this is kind of for the kids, right? You guys know, especially some of you older kids feels like the wrong language to use. But you might know what it is to be put in charge of a sibling, right? To care for people who are younger than you. When I was in 6th grade, which is like younger than, I don't know if we have anybody. Josiah is probably the closest person that we've got to 6th grade here this morning. When I was in 6th grade, there was a youth group kickoff carnival for the beginning of our youth group year at church. And my mom sent me to the carnival with my younger sister, who was in 2nd grade at the time, and she said, "You will take your sister around the carnival, you will play the games with her, you will help her win the prizes, you will take care of her, you will be with her, and when the carnival is over with, I will be back and I will pick you up." And I begrudgingly agreed. I didn't have the option to say no, right? This was something you are going to do. So I get there, and I realize two things at the same time. First, my best friend Josh has just arrived with his younger siblings, and conveniently, there are adult volunteers here that the church has recruited to do the very thing that my mom has sent me to do. So Josh and I conspired together to leave our younger siblings with an adult volunteer from church, have the adult volunteer take our younger siblings around the carnival, play the games, win the prizes, and Josh and I can go and do our own thing because we are too old and too cool for this. Now, Josh's siblings were so young that I don't think he was really in the same kind of danger that I was in, but my sister was going to require a special type of conversation to get her to go along with my ingenious plan. This special type of conversation involved bribing. If you don't tell Mom what I'm doing, I will give you $5, a couple of Beanie Babies I don't really care about. You remember Beanie Babies? Yeah. And some of my cassette tapes that I don't really want to listen to anymore. Cassette tapes. Anyway, do you young people know what cassette tapes are? Okay. It's not quite an 8-track. Well, my plan was perfect until the point when my mom arrived and my sister said, "Guess what Scotty did?" It took literally no time at all for my sister to tell my mother exactly what I had done, and then my punishment was severe, including I had to give her everything that I promised as a bribe, even though I didn't get what I wanted. I lied about taking care of my sister. Now, the truth is not abstract in this story, right? The thing that I had to do was a lived reality. And me trying to get away from that had real consequences for, the beginning of 6th grade, which is like this really crucial time in the life of a young person. And I missed like my first boy-girl party, my first boy-girl birthday party. My friend whose birthday it was, and the girl who ostensibly as a sixth grader was my girlfriend both came to my house and begged my mom to let me come to the party. And you'll know what my mom said. No, that's right. Anderson knows Mimi Vicky. He knows who she is, and he knows what she's like, and that she means business. The truth was not abstract. It was what I either did or did not do, and the consequences for being untruthful, for not doing the thing that I said I would do, that I was asked to do, really affected my life. Let me give you another example. I think I've told this story before. I don't think it was that long ago, but when I was a young person, junior high and high school age, I did a lot of exaggerating because I thought my own life was so unextraordinary that people wouldn't really like me for who I was. And so there were times when I would kind of like open-endedly suggest things that were not completely true in order to get people to assume things about me so that they would like me or I would seem cooler. And one of these things that I did was with one friend. Whenever I would talk about my memories of one of my grandfathers, my grandfather would inexplicably speak with a Scottish accent. Now, I never said my grandfather immigrated here from Scotland, but I heavily implied that by saying things that my grandfather really did say to me with an accent that he absolutely did not have. Now, when a friend who knew that my grandfather was not from Scotland learned from this friend that I had spoken to this way, my friend was like, he is crazy. He's so weird. Why is he doing that? And I was so embarrassed that I basically never talked to that friend ever again. Not because I was mean I was so embarrassed of the fact that I had been caught in this huge exaggeration that I couldn't bring myself to talk to that friend really ever again, and also to confront this uncomfortable truth about myself that when I was young, I thought I was so uninteresting that I exaggerated the truth because I wanted people to like me. The truth is not abstract in that story either. It might seem harmless enough. Here's a friend who doesn't know my family, my extended family, my heritage, my story, any of that. And I heavily suggest something that's not true to be true. But it sure had real life consequences, right? And for a long time, I think some of my friends thought that perhaps I was not a trustworthy person. I hope that's not true today. The truth that Jesus offers to us is not abstract. It's not theoretical. It's not disconnected from everyday life. It's not disembodied. It's not head knowledge. When Jesus says, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free, he's not suggesting that he has some sort of secret information that he's going to tell to those who are following him that somehow will change their life. The truth that Jesus offers us is himself, fully embodied, fully alive, fully living, fully interacting with other people, fully bringing the life of God to bear on the world that we live in and our own lives. And the truth is not abstract. It's not just a sentence. It's not a piece of knowledge that he somehow takes from his head and deposits in our head. Jesus is storied, which is to say that his life has a narrative shape to it. The life that he has lived and is living is the truth that he offers us and that he invites us to step into. We too are storied. I do have Scottish heritage. It is not as close to me in reality, as my grandfather. It's not even the majority of my heritage. And I didn't even know that I had Scottish heritage until much after I had implied that my grandfather spoke with a Scottish accent. We are storied. We make sense of our lives by narrating it. This happened, then this happened. As a consequence, this happened. This got me from this place to that place. This opportunity led to the next opportunity. So the fact that Jesus is storied and that we are storied means that the truth that we may accept or reject from Jesus isn't simply something that we come to know or believe. Jesus is speaking with some Jews. Now, in John's gospel, the Jews is a word that gets used in many different ways. It has led to all kinds of negative consequences for real-life Jews. Anti-Semitism in the Christian tradition is strong, and it's often because we are led to believe that the Jews or the Pharisees or the scribes or the teachers of the law are always only bad guys who are opposed to Jesus. But in John's gospel, the phrase, the Jews, gets used in all kinds of ways. It gets used of the religious leaders who are opposed to Jesus' mission. It gets used of Jewish followers of Jesus who are following him. It gets used of people who began in the beginning of Jesus' ministry to follow him and later choose to walk away. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, they had believed him in the past, they are in the process of disbelieving him. Jesus says, if you abide, if you remain, if you stay, if you tarry, if you live in my word, you are truly my disciples. And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And they answered him, we are offspring of Abraham and have never been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you will become free? Now, what's going on here? What do we know about the story of the descendants of Abraham that they seem to be missing? We've never been enslaved to anyone, right? But we know, and they know, that their ancestors were enslaved in Egypt, and we know, and they know, that not too many generations ago they were exiled in Babylon. So what in the world do they mean that we are offspring of Abraham and have never been enslaved to anyone? Well, they're not talking primarily about physical embodied slavery. They're not talking about being captives in another land. They are talking about something more foundational to their understanding of themselves as God's people. We are offspring of Abraham. We are Abraham's descendants. The word that's used in there is the same word that gets translated seed. We are Abraham's seed. We have never been enslaved to anyone. The story that's operating in the background here is not the enslavement of the Hebrews in Egypt. It's not the exile of the Jews in Babylon. It is the story of Abraham's two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. Abraham and Sarah were called by God, and they were told that despite their advanced age, they would have children who would become the people of promise, the people through whom God would begin the work of rescuing the world from its unfreedom or its slavery to sin. And Abraham and Sarah get anxious in Genesis, and they begin to devise a plan for how they will bring this to pass. And so Sarah says, here is my handmaiden Hagar. Have children for us through her. So Abraham conceives a child with Hagar, and that child is born, and they name that child Ishmael. But not long after that, Sarah becomes pregnant with Isaac. And Sarah says, you should run that slave woman and her child off. So Abraham sends Hagar and Ishmael out into the wilderness. They run out of food and water. And Hagar calls out to God to be rescued, and God responds to her, showing them water in the wilderness and promising to Hagar that Ishmael too will be the beginning of a great family. And Hagar is the first person in Scripture to name God, and names God, the God who sees me. And yet, what the Jews who are conversing with Jesus in this story are saying is, we are true inheritors of Abraham. We are not descendants of the slave woman. We are Abraham's seed. We have never been enslaved to anyone. But Jesus has something else in mind. He's not talking only about physical descendants. Jesus wants God's people to step out of the legal reality of being descendants of Abraham, descendants of Sarah, descendants of the free woman, and wants them to step into the inheritance of being children of God. Because you see, children in the ancient culture were thought or believed, or at least it was hoped, that children would imitate their father, their parents. That they would come to have the same concerns, the same character, the same life that their parents had. That's why when Jesus says in the Beatitudes, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will become children of God, what he intends for those who make peace to know about themselves is that they are acting exactly the way their heavenly Father acts, by making peace. Jesus says to these Jews who believed him in the beginning of their understanding of him, who believed him and were following him towards the beginning of his ministry, but are now beginning to fall away because the difficulty of the teachings is becoming too much for them. Jesus says to them, truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever, but the son remains forever. Again, Isaac and Ishmael is working in the background here. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. I know that you are offspring of Abraham, yet you seek to kill me because my word finds no place in you. Because my word finds no place in you. Later, Jesus will go on to say, you're not actually children of Abraham because Abraham would not try to kill me like you are trying to kill me. You're not acting like your parents. You're not ready to receive the revelation that God is showing you in this moment the way that your father Abraham was. So you may be seed of Abraham, you may be descendants of Abraham, but you are not children of Abraham. The word that finds or doesn't find a place in these who are interacting with Jesus is the story of God. The story of being open to God breaking into history, breaking into your life, and changing the way that you live, not by depositing some formerly unknown knowledge in your life, but by giving you a truer story. The story of God which trains us to know ourselves. I often talk about the story making its home in our hearts, the story that the scriptures narrate making its home in our hearts in such a way that we are then capable of stepping into that same story and living the continuation of it. And just like these Jews that Jesus is engaging, we have competing stories in our lives. The things that have happened to us, the things that we have made happen, the things that we have believed because of who our ancestors are, the things that we have dreamed for our future. And these things are in competition with the story that God is telling. Sometimes that competition makes both stories better. Sometimes that competition brings these things into places where they cannot continue together along the same road. Flannery O'Connor, who is one of my favorite novelists and short story writers, she says, and Rachel, I should have reached out to you. I do not know the citation for this. I could not find it anywhere. But she says, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you odd." Freedom for Christians is that which sets us apart from the freedom that the world offers. It makes you different. It makes you weird. It makes you stand out because you're no longer fighting for a freedom which requires your neighbor to be unfree in some way, but you are now made free to love your neighbor as yourself. The story that God tells in Jesus, this truth that Jesus offers us, it cannot be learned only by reading books. It is not an abstract word floating through history that somehow will reach us and make us smarter, better, happier, healthier, and more beautiful people. The only way to learn this word is to watch and to follow the one who speaks it again and again and again and again as the story that God is telling about the world and about our lives and about the way things have been and ultimately about the way things will be. I feel like it's obvious, but it probably bears repeating, that this is not simply telling the truth versus lying. That to receive this word, that to abide in this word, to watch and to follow Jesus is not simply to be committed to telling the truth or being honest or reflecting reality the way that you experienced it. It is knowing the details of the stories that you've lived and the story that you're living and negotiating that difference in the life that Jesus offers us. It is knowing the details of the stories that you've lived and the story that you're living and negotiating those differences in the life that Jesus offers us. The truth is never abstract. The truth is always embodied. It is embodied in Jesus. I want to, before we turn to the table, and I want to go quickly, but I want to just, feels necessary to stretch that point out just a little bit more. We often think of loving our neighbors as ourselves in terms of doing the nice thing or the kind thing for the person that's next to us. But let me assure you that Jesus was not killed on a Roman cross because he was nice and kind. Jesus was killed on a Roman cross because the truth that was his life threatened the status quo of the empires and the kingdoms and the wealth and the powers of this world. Loving your neighbor as yourself should make you eminently odd in a world where people are so consumed with getting ahead and doing what's necessary. And this translates into the life of the church. What Scott McKnight and Laura Barringer talk about in this chapter most of all is resisting false narratives. How do we resist the stories that we tell ourselves that help us to feel like we are okay just the way things are? Or we need things to continue to be just this way so that we will be okay. Which means that any time that someone is abused, that abuse is pushed away and forgotten or covered up or minimized or spiritually bypassed. The love of Jesus ought to lead us to repentance early. I said something early in this series that it's been sitting with me very strangely ever since I said it, because I started to think, because here's the thing, I want to take a really hard stance on this. Church abuse has ruined people's lives. Abuse of all kinds. But if there's one place where it shouldn't happen, and yet it's happening really rampantly, and it's just absolutely destroying people's lives, it's in the church. So I want to take this really hard stance against it and say abuse should not happen in the church, and it will not happen in this church. And if it does happen in this church, we are going to clamp it down so fast. And I was so riled up about it that I said something to the effect of, if I hurt you, you should fire me. Now, I don't want to pull back from my really hard stance on church abuse, but I feel like there's a difference between getting hurt in the midst of relationship and there being ample time and opportunity to make repair of that hurt, and abuse, which is of a different magnitude and probably ongoing, and that then seeks to protect the abuser. Right? If I hurt you, let's repair the relationship. If I abuse you, get rid of me. But that's the thing, is that the truth that makes you odd is the kind of truth that says, I don't have to be right all the time. I don't have to be powerful all the time. I don't always have to be the leader. I don't have to be the one with good ideas. I don't have to be the only one with good ideas. It's acknowledging that this church is fine without me. Because it's not the church of Scotty Moore. It's the church of Jesus Christ. And so, knowing the details of the stories that you've lived and the story that you're living and the story that Jesus offers us, and negotiating those differences will often mean that we have to tell the truth in such a way that we end up humiliated. Or saying it another way, humbled. I'm willing to dispense with my own pride in order to not be nice to my neighbor, but to love my neighbor as myself.